I spent basically 2 decades of my life making other people's dreams, aspirations, monetary futures a reality, but I didn't focus on making mine a reality. And the sooner that you can start, the more fulfillment and contentment that you're going to find in your life. If you're finding yourself in this situation, how do you break through all this mess? How do you create the life and this future self that you aspire to be?
My guest today is going to blow you away. He is none other than John Miles. He is the dynamic force behind Passion Struck, captivating millions with his globally renowned podcast and national radio show.
I find that what we end up doing is we arson the very aspirations that we long for in our lives, and we allow ourselves to be completely unintentional about how we're approaching life. We just go through the motions and let the distractions and the things that we encounter dictate our path. Instead of learning how to play that game, you have to allow yourself to dream your dream.
His latest work, Passion Struck, 12 powerful principles to unlock your purpose and ignite your most intentional life, delves into the heart of what it means to be alive. Now, what we dive into today is how to create a meaningful mission, how to unleash your true potential, and how to transform the way you lead in your life right now.
The people who achieve the greatest things in life, they don't stop when they hit a certain pinnacle of success. They keep going. They reinvent themselves. They do something different.
How does that relate back to being passion struck?
One of the things I explore in the book is,
when did you realize that Passion Struck was going to be not just a title of your book, but really kind of this revolution? And especially for at a time where people are really rethinking what they want to do in their lives. They're no longer going on that long career path. Things evolve and shift and change. And I feel like you are that person that talks about passion. So where did this all start?
Neeta, it's a path that I never thought I was going to take. Probably until 2007, 2008. I was a senior executive at Lowe's Home Improvement, and I had really gotten back into the spiritual aspects of my life at this point. And as I was really exploring those and exploring more about my meaning and what I was put here to do, I started to hear this inner voice start talking to me. And I liken this to, we have two voices. We have a much louder voice that kind of rules our days, and it's kind of telling us, keep on the path that you're going, do the things that you're doing. It's working. You don't need to change. And I was on this path that I had never anticipated when I was a kid or even a young adult. I had always had in my mind that I was going to be an FBI agent, a CIA agent, knocking down doors, being in the middle of everything. And that's where the trajectory had taken me after I'd left the military, is I had earned a right to become an FBI agent. And literally 3 days before my Quantico class, it gets canceled because Congress couldn't pass the spending bill that was in front of them. And it really altered the entire course of my life. So fast forward 10, 12 years from that point, I'm now sitting behind a chair. I'm the senior executive that I never thought I would be. And this voice started coming to me saying, you are supposed to help the lonely, the battered, the beaten, the broken, the bored, the helpless of the world. And I have to tell you, I am like, what in the world do I do with this? It was like it was like something coming out of left field that I didn't anticipate and didn't know, how do I even approach this? And so I did what most people would do. I ignored it. And I ended up taking a job, moving to Austin, and I became a senior executive at Dell. And I think when you have something like this that you're called upon to do and you ignore it, the world or the universe starts making this voice become more apparent to you over time. And that's exactly what happened to me. And Neeta, it happened in some pretty biblical ways. I remember I had just been in Austin, maybe a couple short weeks. I went home back to Charlotte for the weekend, came back. My entire corporate apartment was flooded, everything inside it destroyed.
Wow.
I end up moving to a different corporate apartment in the same complex, but on a second floor. And about 2 weeks later, I'm taking a shower, and all of a sudden, I feel this intense biting. I almost thought I was being stung. I almost thought like I was in a horror movie. And I look up,
Oh my god.
and those small scorpions that you have all around Austin, they are actually
Oh yeah.
falling from the ceiling on top of me in the
Oh,
shower, and I'm getting stung all over. And this proceeds to happen to me a couple times more in the middle of the night. And the place that I'm at won't believe that I have scorpions. They send exterminators there. They can't find anything. It takes me at night with a blue light actually showing them everywhere before they start taking me seriously. Then we buy a house and decide to do this small home improvement project on it, just replacing what was a wine area. And we find out that half the house has got termite damage. And since it wasn't caught during the inspection, it's $250,000 to fix out of my own pocket. And these things just kept happening and growing in intensity. And it really culminated for me a number of years later in a pretty traumatic event that really just woke me up to the fact that I can ignore this, or I can double down and really seek meaning in what am I being called to do. And the more I started to explore this, what I found is that there's so many people who are living in what Henry David Thoreau called quiet desperation, meaning they're in these
mm,
life paths like I was in, where after a while you kind of get stuck in it because let's face it, as you get older, the burdens of life start magnifying. And once you found the steady income source and you've got the mortgage, you've got the car payments, you've got this lifestyle that you've built up, it is so difficult to break free from that. And really, what it amounted to in me over time was just this apparent feeling that what I was doing in life didn't have significance to it. I would get up in the morning, I'd go to work, and it was like I was going through the motions of doing the job and finding myself in this endless loop of meetings and emails and HR issues and office politics that did everything but inspire me to want to spend another day doing it. And I think a ton of people can relate to it.
I mean, it's so interesting that you had this sort of biblical kind of upheaval, and it's almost like the signs were starting to flash, but you could choose to kind of ignore it. And I feel like a lot of us can be like, "Oh, that's just kind of, that's just like a one-time thing." But I'm not really feeling it in my heart of hearts. But I'm just going to keep going because yes, we have these like golden handcuffs, or in my case, the golden handcuffs because I was a dentist, and I feel like you and I came from these professions that were kind of golden handcuffs. What do you say to probably the younger version of John, or young people now that are kind of at their crossroads? Maybe they are wanting to start something. They see you and they're like, "Whoa, 32 million downloads, and you get to talk to people every day on their passions. How do I get to do that?" And maybe that's going to be me in 3 years from now. What do you say to them if they're listening to this?
Well, so I have two kids who are young adults. One's 20, she's at the University of Florida, the other is 25. And they are very worried, both of them, about their future because they see this locomotive coming at them full barrel of AI automation, this next digital economy that we're going into. And both of them are scared for how do we approach our life going forward because it looks like it's going to be one that's going to cause us to have to change a lot. And that's one of the things I really talk about is I have examined over the past 9 years now 750 different luminaries, everything from CEOs to actors and actresses like Hilary Swank, professional athletes to astronauts, one thing they all have in common is constantly reinventing themselves, those who are at the top of their game. And that's one of the things that I would tell myself is get ready for a wild ride, because sometimes external events change your course and other times you need to self-recognize when you need to change the course. And I think the other thing I would tell them is I spent basically 2 decades of my life making other people's dreams, aspirations, monetary futures a reality, but I didn't focus on making mine a reality. And the sooner that you can start, the more fulfillment and contentment that you're going to find in your life. And the other thing is once you get to the point that I was at, that gap or chasm that you have to cross from where you are to this new life becomes larger and larger over time. And so breaking free from it also takes, I think, a longer duration because you can't just unravel this in one fell swoop. It takes a very intentional approach and deliberate effort to get to the new path that you need to take in life.
Yeah, I think that it's one of those it's one of those things we think it's so glamorous and it's so easy to when we make that decision in our mind that okay, this thing isn't it. The thing that I'm doing is no longer lighting me up anymore. I've lost the fizzle or my passion has kind of is not there. And we think, okay, let's just jump ship and I'm just going to put my resignation letter in tomorrow. We need a plan. I kind of share this and say, let's not burn our bridges. You've written an entire book around this. And I want to just read it because I've been waiting for this book to come out. Passion Struck 12 Powerful Principles to Unlock Your Purpose and Ignite Your Most Intentional Life. It's a pretty bold statement.
Well, it is a bold statement. And if you actually buy the book and follow the steps, I'll make another bold statement. It's going to change your life because I didn't write this book for it to sit on your bookshelf. I wrote it for you to live it and to become the best possible person that you possibly could become.
And I feel like you're such a huge example because I mean, here you are, and I want to just kind of go back into the story before we dive fully deep in the book. Here you are, you're answering the calls to really recognize that Austin's not it, that being in this amazing executive position isn't it. How then do you make the move and how did you end up then starting this media company that you have now and this very successful podcast? What was where was the gap and how did you follow your passion to get where you are now?
Yeah. So the first thing I think I would like to tell the audience is even though the path I was on to becoming the senior executive wasn't the one in my mind that I ever thought I would do as a kid, I was very good at it.
Mm.
And I think no matter what path you pursue, if you're a high achiever, you're going to find how to be successful doing it. And so, I mean, I was a practice leader in a big four consulting firm by the time I was 29. I was up for partner by the time I was 31. Unfortunately, I worked for Arthur Andersen, so the company collapsed underneath my feet. I was a chief information security officer for a Fortune 50 by the time I was 31, chief data officer for a Fortune 50 by the time I was 37, chief information officer before I'm 40 years old. So a very rapid climb. And I think what I would say is that I had outer order. I mean, if you would look at my life from an outside perspective, it seemed like it was going magnificently. I had the family, the house, the car, the possessions, the accolades, the titles, everything that you would possibly want. But internally, at the same time that I was given this new mission, I was falling apart inside. And I started to feel a numbness inside of me that I can't even explain. But I think even when you're there, it becomes so difficult to go against the tide and to pursue this other path. So if anyone's listening, I'll be the first to tell you that it takes an extreme amount of effort. But what I discovered was that what got me to this place to begin with happened over a long period of time. And it was a series of micro choices that I had made over days, months, and what turned out to be years. And so, unbreaking yourself from this, unshackling yourself, you can't do it in an instant. So, I had to start making micro choices in a different direction. And so, what I talk about in the book is this concept of becoming a life crafter. And so, for me, I ended up, after I hit a pretty low point, seeking assistance through a psychologist who happened to be a life coach. And after spending 3, 4 sessions with me and kind of getting a lay of the land, he had a really, for me, profound discussion with me. We went into this, and instead of him asking me questions, he said, I want you to visualize yourself. Imagine going into your kitchen, there's a stool there. You're now sitting on this stool, and it was a longer conversation than this, but to make this short, he said, now think about what's underneath that stool. For you, there are a couple different supports, but there's one that's far greater than the others, and it's become the constant grind. And for you, it's causing your entire stool to topple over. And that's what's causing the burnout you're feeling, the numbness, the lack of mattering in your life. And he goes, now I want you to think about this stool and your future self. And if you could become the ideal version of yourself that you think or imagine in your mind that you want to become, what different support layers would you put underneath that stool? And for someone who's listening, it could be anything. For me, I decided that it was going to be mental health, physical health, relationship health, emotional health, and spiritual health. Because I figured if I could get those things in balance, then the rest of it's going to take care of itself. And to answer your question,
Yeah.
the initial step for me then became, which area do I focus in? And because I was feeling this profound emotional overwhelm, it was really that emotional component and figuring out what this calling was for me. And so the first step I took was to really get back into a mindfulness practice, because I realized that the one thing I wasn't doing well was self care and really self awareness. And that to unlock everything else, I had to do some significant introspection to really get back to the core of who John Miles is. And what I've discovered through this process is that for years, I had been living inauthentically. It was as if I was living my life as if I was in a masquerade with a mask covering who I was,
Mhm.
pretending to be a completely different version of myself than I inherently was. And the more I started to recognize that and realize what was happening, I realized how much my life had been engulfed in self doubt, perfectionism, trying to be something that I wasn't for others. And that this lie had just become more and more of my identity, to the point that it was really fueling my sense of not mattering and really engulfing myself with inner shame, because I had covered up so many of the past traumas and other things that had impacted me. I realized I had to clear up that whole mess before I
Yeah.
could really get in tune with this person who was going to be even possible of helping people, because you can't love someone else until you love yourself. And at that point, I really felt no self worth at all. And so that became my journey. And what I found was
So
that
true.
when you start focusing on one aspect of yourself, no matter what it is, it has over time a compound effect that you start working on other areas of yourself without sometimes even noticing it. And so, I mean, this started out really painfully, and it took a couple years to get on the right track. But once I did, your whole life shifts.
Completely. Well, and I want to stop you right there, though, John, because I feel like you're bringing up an incredible point, and it's something that on the Brave Table we dive into. What are those feelings? What are the emotions that and maybe even some of the things that have happened, your upbringing, the things that the big T traumas, the little T traumas that may have either affected you or that subconsciously they were lingering, and they're kind of sitting just like right under beneath the surface. But we think that because we're focusing on our external kind of accolades or the external next rung on the ladder of traditional conventional success, that thing is going to just band-aid over my inner wounds or the inner things that I have needed to dealt with, but I don't want to because it's too painful or too scared. But I'm going to focus on that next ladder, and I'm going to focus on the next promotion or the next person to date or the next human. And oh my gosh, boy, does that person light me up. And but at the expense of ourselves. And I think you're bringing up a really huge point in order to get really clear on what your passions were after this monumental kind of revelation that you did not want to be where you were in order to become the John who you are today, or the John that was going to start and try new things. There's this gap that I'm hearing you share around, all right, I needed to clear up my emotional mess, the emotional strings that were tied up into a very tight ball, and I needed to start unraveling that. And that's I want to commend you for that, because it takes a lot of vulnerability to take us there, because I feel like everyone just wants to see the shiny in the outwardly achievement, success, and accolades. And many times when we peel back the layer, it's we've all had those moments where, wow, we're doing this thing and it no longer lights us up. And I want to kind of dive into a little bit about your book, because it's you get into the 12 powerful principles to unlock your purpose and ignite your most intentional life. But you talk about kind of in the beginning where, and I want to just read this from the preface of your book. Today, fewer people are taking the leap of faith to pursue their dreams. Individuals from the millennial and Gen Z cohorts, who should be leading the charge into a new era of entrepreneurship, are increasingly shunning the idea. The high levels of student and personal debt are often cited as lowering an individual's propensity to start a business. And experts have pointed to the spiraling $1.5 trillion student debt in the US alone as a major factor. And then you talk about some of these underlying issues are really around indifference, insecurity, self-doubt, conformity, and entitlement. So, can you help us unpack that?
Yes, I will do that. I'm first going to touch on what you were talking about before, which I think is important for any listener to understand. People look at different habits that people have, whether it's doing drugs or an addiction to alcohol, etc., as coping skills. But as you brought up, you could be a serial dater. You could be someone who constantly has to be in a relationship because of past wounds. You could be someone who constantly has to work because you're covering up past wounds. There's so many addictions that we have. And if I could go back to your earlier question, something that I would have told myself earlier in life is I have experienced a ton of big T trauma. I mean, so much, Neetha, that one time I saw a psychologist who, after a couple sessions of hearing my story, she said, "I don't understand how you're alive." She goes, "Most people would have killed themselves a long time ago." And I mean, it was brutal because I have had childhood trauma. I've had physical assault trauma, sexual trauma, combat trauma, more physical assault trauma. I mean, it's just been a layering. And I guess throughout most of it, I thought I was strong enough to deal with a lot of it inside. And what it led to was me using other mechanisms, such as work, such as for a while serial dating, such as alcohol, to try to power my way through it. And all it did was cover up the underlying stuck points that were halting me from living the life that I wanted to lead. And so, like, the biggest thing I would tell myself is don't delay another second to get to the point and the heart of what is causing you to be stuck, because it is just going to cause you so much pain. And that pain is just going to get worse over time than you just dealing with it earlier on in life. So that would be a huge piece of the advice I would give. Now, as far as what I'm trying to explore in the book is, for a very long time, America and the American dream was just cherished throughout the world. I remember in the 90s going to Europe and being an American and people almost looking up to us like we were rock stars. And you just felt this intense pride of being an American, and people aspired to be like our culture because they saw so many entrepreneurs, people pushing innovation and creativity and everything else. And if you go around the world today, and I know you travel a lot, that same sentiment is no longer there. I mean, it has vanished. And when you look at that gap now of 30, 35 years, a lot has transpired. But one of the biggest things that has transpired is we are in now 3 to 4 decades of consistent decline in entrepreneurship and people starting new businesses. I mean, it is, if you start looking at the charts from the Kauffman Foundation, it just shows you we have like a major problem. The American dream is dead. In fact, business formation by Americans aged 20 to 34 has fallen ever since 2010. And we're at a fraction of the number of new enterprises today that the baby boomers and then my generation were creating when they were the same age. Another thing I highlight
Mm.
in the book is the Congressional Budget Office data that shows among US households, the decline between 1985 and 2023 is the most apparent in college graduates and those with high skills, going from 12% of the new businesses being formed to under 5%. And so we have this
Wow.
basically, entrepreneurship in the US has declined because these high skilled people and college graduates found that they can earn more by taking high paying jobs than the risk of trying to start creating businesses themselves. But what they don't realize is everything that they're giving up in following that path and not pursuing
Right.
their passion and being true to themselves. And that's what I try to explore at the beginning of the book. And I think
Mhm.
the world that these kids are growing up, these young adults have grown up in with social media and all this pressure to conform to the expectations that are laid out there has only compounded the mess that we find ourselves in. So the book really becomes then, if you're finding yourself in this situation, how do you break through all this mess? How do you create the life that and this future self that you aspire to be? And that's what the rest of the book aims to show the reader.
Yeah, and I love that you kind of even get into and I'm all about frameworks. I feel like that's just like my my science brain back in school. But I love that you give us this passion struck framework, the 12 steps to really unlocking an intentional life. And I know that each chapter is kind of devoted into one of these principles. And you have these behavior shifts and then these mindset shifts. Can you kind of share just a little bit about this for us?
Yeah. So as I was going through the research of how do you go about creating your best self, I really came across three different things that have to be working synergistically with each other: mindset shifts, behavior shifts, and something that I call the psychology of progress. And so when I talk about a mindset shift, which is part one of my book, it's really about clarifying our why, and because it influences how we approach challenges and opportunities. And this is really a fundamental change in perspective that's deeply rooted in our passion, which is crucial for setting the stage of the sequential alterations that need to happen with our behavior. The behavior shift, which is the section two, I really discuss why behavior changes is such an important aspect of those who are desiring to become passion struck, because once our mindset has been recalibrated, the next logical progression is a shift in behavior where the role of persevering against the odds becomes crucial. Our behavior is the what, and it's a direct reflection of our mindset dictating how we act in pursuit of our goals. And then the third
Mm.
part, which is the psychology of progress, really gets into two critical aspects: the importance of taking deliberate action and having all of this fueled by intrinsic motivation. And to me, this formula of mindset shifts, behavior shifts, and the psychology of progress is really the core that sits behind creating a life that matters. So that's kind of how the book is arranged, is against this thing that I call the passion struck model.
Well, and I feel like none of these things were ever taught to us in school. And so, I mean, it's unfortunate but fortunate that we have passionate humans like yourself who are now, because of we like to say, because of your own dharma and really your soul's purpose, kind of bring this up at the Brave Table, but from different points of life, kind of bringing you here to this exact time. We're having this conversation, and now people can kind of learn the process from you so that we can start to take these bigger risks and we can live a life that's full of intentionality for ourselves. What have you come across, and maybe in writing this book as well, but even in many of your interviews and interviewing 400 plus incredible human beings, what do you think some of the biggest challenges that people face, whether they're high achieving, whether they're constantly evolving? What is that thing that tends to hold them back in pursuing their passion?
Well, I think we put limits on ourselves. I mean, I like to say one of the most profound things I have found in my own journey, because all these principles, I ended up doing me search and implemented them all on myself to figure out if they actually worked, and took me to a different place. But what the profound thing I realized is that the most incredible person on this entire planet, for anyone who's listening, the most energetic, the most compassionate, the most intelligent person that you were ever going to meet is the person who stares back at you in the mirror. But the biggest competitor that that person is going to ever meet is the person who's staring them in the mirror as well. And I find that what we end up doing is we arson the very aspirations that we long for in our lives. I call it, we become a visionary arsonist. And we do these self sabotaging behaviors that it's almost like you decide that you want to run a marathon, and all of a sudden you have this goal, but then you start changing your training routine, and then you change your eating routine, and then you short circuit this element of your training and that element of your training. And long before you know it, you start thinking, well, there's no way I can run a marathon. And it's because we don't stay intentional to the paths that we lay out for ourselves. And one of the things I explore in the book is that people often hear this phrase, you're living your life on autopilot. And in some sense, I agree with it, because we end up doing the same thing over and over again. But I think that it's the wrong analogy, because even when we're on autopilot and the pilot puts the plane on autopilot, the plane is still going in a positive direction. I think the bigger issue we have now is that people are living their life as if they're a pinball in the game of pinball. And we allow ourselves to be completely unintentional about how we're approaching life. We just go through the motions and let the distractions and the things that we encounter dictate our path, instead of learning how to play that game so that we understand the intricacies. Because anyone who understands pinball understands that it's kind of like life. It's a whole bunch of mini games that make up a larger game, and you really have to understand that those intricacies and be deliberate about understanding the path the ball needs to take for you to win the game. And the same thing goes with life.
I love that analogy because I think that it's one of those things where if we have a failure, if we try to put ourselves out there, and I know many times people are listening to this to be brave, to put themselves out there, to start something new. But what if we put ourselves out there and then we get crickets or we get trolls or we get fully rejected and then we don't play the game of pinball, where I'm hearing you share that this is the game of life. Things are gonna go up and down and sideways and zigzag and in all the ways, and it's kind of spontaneous. But what I'm also hearing is to kind of embrace that, because that's where the fire comes in. And I also wanted to kind of just ask and kind of get into this whole idea of what seems to be happening from the baby boomer generation, or kind of like our parents generation, looking at us, and and even the generations even before me, like the Gen Z or the, I think, Gen Alpha, that is kind of like, all right, today I want to do this, and then tomorrow I want to do this, and good vibes only. And if it's not in full flow and I can't fully manifest it, then it's not for me. How does that relate back to being passion struck?
Yeah, the thing that scares me that I often see in the younger ages is there's a softness that definitely didn't exhibit itself in the baby boomers and wasn't part of the culture I was brought up in either. Meaning, we so often want to take the path that seems to be the easy path instead of the harder path in life. And I have found in my own journey that there is no easy path. Often, what seems as an easy path eventually is going to have potlucks or potholes in it, just like anything else. But I really think we're trying to use technology and other things to whiz bang our way around some of the harder life lessons that we all need to take inside to live the life and be the authentic people that we need to become. And so that's one of the biggest things I see is I think the Navy SEALs have this saying, embrace the suck. And there's a reason why they have to embrace it. And one of the interviews I did in the book was with my good friend, who's a former Navy SEAL and astronaut, Chris Cassidy. And he talked to me about when he was at Buds, embracing the suck. One of the most important lessons he learned was that trying times end. And the more you put yourself through trying times, it becomes like an elastic band that you perfect over time, stretching it out and having a trying time, letting the elasticity come back, etc. And I think the more we condition ourselves to be able to get through trying times, the easier it becomes to adjust to the flow of life. And so I am a huge advocate of exposing yourself to discomfort as often as you possibly can, whether it's through taking boundary magnifying courage challenges that you put yourself through, or just exposing yourself to different thoughts and perceptions and ways of going about your daily life. Because the more that you start seeing things through different perspectives and not as either or, as we like to do in the Western world, but through paradoxical thinking, both and thinking, it
Mhm.
makes a profound difference on how you approach the difficulties that are going to face you. But that to me is one of the biggest things we have to solve for in the future.
Yeah. It's one of those dichotomies, right? I think we were just talking about, you just mentioned the paradoxes of life. We want things to be ease and flow, but then again, how are we supposed to build our resiliency when we go through these tough times? And I love that the Navy SEAL said embrace the suck, because that's what we say too from my book. And I think that I'm so glad that you are literally, I wish you were my mentor when I kind of jumped ship from dentistry into kind of the unknown. And what I'm hearing as we navigate through our conversation in your book is that you're supposed to be embracing the difficulties, exposing yourself to some of those hard things, because that's how we actually grow. And that's how we start to build this muscle, and it's almost this fuel for the passions that you want to create and foster. And without that fuel, how are those passions going to actually grow? It's kind of like the proverbial hero's journey. Well, I guess even in your instance, was there ever, when you were on this new path of building passion struck, and even in the beginning, what was your mindset shifts that were happening?
So the mindset shifts that were happening for me are the six that I kind of go through in the book. So the first one really goes into this whole idea of something called uh, it's really looking at the three different sides of self: your actual self, your odd self, and your ideal self, and recognizing who you are at this moment in time. The ought self, which is the person you think you should be, and the ideal self. And I had absolutely become my ought self. And now I had to repicture my life in taking the journey of becoming my ideal self. So the next step is, once you understand what that gap looks like, you're going to have to reinvent yourself, because the person that you are and the person that you want to become are two different things. And so I call this the brand reinventor, but it's really about realizing that constant reinvention is going to have to be a norm in your life, because the people who achieve the greatest things in life, they don't stop when they hit a certain pinnacle of success. They keep going. They reinvent themselves. They do something different. And I think if you want to look at a great example of this, look no further than Dwayne The Rock Johnson or Oprah or yourself, into how you're constantly changing, constantly evolving. The third thing then that typically happens is, once you're showing up differently in the world and you have a different version of who you want to be, your environment and the people in it are going to sense that change. And you're likely going to have to start taking actions around both of them if you want to stay on this course. And I call it doing the mosquito audit, because there are invisible forces all around us that are like mosquitoes, but they're human mosquitoes in our life. And we need to be able to recognize them to understand which ones we need to swat away and which ones are good influences, something that I call sharks, that we need to surround ourselves with. Think Shark Tank. And then from
Oh,
there,
I love that.
yeah. And from there, once you've reached that point, now you've got to confront all the fears that you have inside about making this leap and not being capable of doing it. And then so I call that the fear confronter. Then it gets into a concept called the perspective harnesser, where you really need to start re-examining your how you're approaching things. And it really gets into this both and paradoxical thinking paradigm, versus the way that most of us have been taught to look at the world, is either white or black, either or.
Mhm.
And then it ends with the most important mindset shift that you then have to make is to be an action creator. And this is one of my favorite chapters. I interviewed a long term mentor of mine, astronaut Wendy Lawrence, who has this great message that you have to allow yourself to dream your dream. And
Mm.
this goes back to the conversation we were having. I asked her, and
Yep.
she's now in her mid 60s, and I asked her, what's the biggest change that you've seen as you've been talking to audiences of kids over the past 3 to 4 decades? And she said, it again goes back to, they're not allowing themselves to dream their dream. They say they want to be, let's just say, an astronaut, and then they run into an algebra class that throws them into a spiral. And instead of doing the hard work to get through it, getting the tutoring or whatever it takes, they give up on their dream. And it's amazing. I just read an article that people who go into algebra and can't successfully go through it or allow themselves to get stuck with it have a 90% less chance to achieve the things that they want in life than those who persevere. I was blown away
No way, from
from
algebra?
algebra. And I'm just giving an example. In her life, she graduates from the Naval Academy, gets into a master's program at MIT, and for the first time in her life is flunking a class. And at that point, she could have either given up, self-selected out of that class, but instead she went to the professor and said, "What do I need to do to improve? What are the actions that I need to take to not only get through this, but to make sure that I understand it and that I'm not just barely getting through, I'm powering through." And that's something that we all need to do, is to take those actions even when they seem insurmountable, because on the other side of that, that's where fulfillment, that's where our dreams lie, is on the other side of that mountain.
Right. No, and I feel like you're bringing us to a point where in those fears and when we're climbing up that next new mountain and when we are starting to rediscover ourselves or evolve into our next evolution and our the butterfly that's starting to emerge, these emotional and mental blocks that we have in our head can really hold us back. And many times it sounds like it could be the ego, because it's like, oh, am I going to look stupid if I go to the professor and tell them, hey, I need some more support? Or if I'm going to go to somebody that I actually admire, maybe it's online, maybe it's elsewhere, and send them a DM. And what if they don't reply back? What does that make me feel? But what if they do? What if they do reply back? What if they do say, "Hey, here's my office hours. Come, send me a note or I'll spend an hour with you." And for those of us kind of in the driver's seat and people are now asking, what does it take to spend 15 or 20 or 30 minutes to perhaps change the trajectory of somebody's life because you are giving them that time? And it reminds me of a mentor that I had in the very beginning of my stages of when I think I had sold my practice, my dental practice, where I was just kind of like in the midst of it. And he was a VC, and that was the only way I knew what VCs do. I was in medicine, and that's all I knew. I knew brick and mortar, and I knew dental offices, and that's all I knew. And I get, invited to this pitch event. And that was the end of story, because I had all these new startup entrepreneurs that were pitching their ideas to become part of this incubator. And then there were 30 VCs. And this one VC it just took me under his wing and was like, all right, what do you want to do? You can sit here and be one of us, or you can also start whatever it is that you want to start next. And I had zero idea what startups were, but that was the entry point. And what I hear from you sharing in this book, you're giving people the 12 tools to manage their mindset and also check in with some of the behaviors that sometimes can hold us back.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, the two kind of play with each other. So, a mindset shift that I had was the mosquito auditor, which really results in the need to set better boundaries and limitations for what you are willing to put yourself through. How much negativity are you willing to expose yourself to? And then that helps determine the boundaries that you need to put in place. And then in the behavior shift section, I have a behavior shift that then goes into boundary magnification and why it's so important. And that oftentimes pursuing these dreams that we want sometimes means that we're alone, because we have to stand up to our convictions and our values if we want to persevere into becoming that person we imagine in our minds. Because I think that's one of the things that we often let through the cracks is we set these values for ourselves, we set these ambitions, we set these aspirations, and then we allow ourselves to get misaligned to them. And to me, the most important thing people need to understand about boundary setting is it's a form of self-care and self-compassion, because you're actually doing yourself a great act of service to yourself by putting them into place.
It's so true. And I know that your time is so precious, but I have a few other questions that I want to ask. And you have a beautiful gift for our audience. And I'm just so honored and I'm so thankful that you were able to do that. What is the overall vision for the book?
Well, the overall vision for the book was to start building a movement of people who want to become passion struck, who want to go on the journey of living a life where they feel fulfilled, where they feel content, where they feel that the life that they're leading is making them feel good inside about how they are serving humanity. Because at the end of the day, to me, that's what we're all called to do, is to make everyone else's life on this planet and their journey a little bit better. And I think so many of us are so self centric now instead of being other centric. So that is one of my hopes, is that we have what I call in the book is more creative amplifiers and orchestrators who are out there trying to make a change to better the world that we all live in. And that really is the end goal of the book, is showing so many people how they too can live a life of significance, which is really about helping others feel like they matter in their life as well.
So good. It's so good. You guys, Passion Struck is out. 12 powerful principles to unlock your purpose and ignite your most intentional life. John, I know you have a gift for us. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where we can get the book? And before we get into our igniting round, where we can follow you and connect with you?
Yeah. So when I was doing the pre launch, I had a number of free giveaways, and I've decided to extend that, but I've actually made them even better. So if you purchase the book, and you can find it everywhere, Amazon, your local bookstores, Target, Walmart. But if you come back to the Passion Struck website /Passion Struck book, and you put your order number in, I have curated 3 different ebooks, a masterclass, and a book club version of Passion Struck that I will give you for free. And these are some incredible ebooks. I probably spent $5,000 or $6,000 creating these things. One is I explore the deliberate action process in the book. I give you a 70-page workbook on how to implement it in your own life if you go to the website. Another one is a workbook all around intrinsic motivation and how to find it both professionally and personally. And then I did a success ebook that shows the path to mattering. And I also have in here an ebook on how to overcome self doubt, and then a masterclass on 5 ways to find purpose in your life, plus that book club reading. So, a ton of value
Wow.
here, because I want
So much.
in this book, I have QR codes, I have exercises. My whole desire with this is that you keep taking action on your dreams and becoming the best version of yourself that you can be possibly become.
Oh, John, you're such a big ball of light, and it's so clear you are so passionate about helping so many people dive into their passions. I mean, I'm so honored to sit with you, to learn from you. There's not many people that I call mentor status, but I feel like you definitely have been, and I'm so excited that our audience gets to learn from you. So everybody go and where can we follow you on? Are you on Instagram, LinkedIn?
Yeah, the easiest place, I have 2 different ways you can follow me. If you want to follow me personally, John R. Miles. If you want to follow the podcast, at Passion Struck Podcast.
So good. Add Passion Struck, the podcast, 32 million downloads to your weekly listen. We'll also link in the show notes our amazing episode together on John's podcast. And we'll also link where you can get the book Passion Struck. It's better to do this in community. I'm always, always sharing this. So get one copy for your friend, for a family member, for your aunt, uncle, cousin. Do it with somebody, because that's how we also keep each other accountable as well. And so before we end, John, are you ready? I'm going to ask you some rapid fire questions, and you can take as long as you want or as short as you want to answer them.
Okay.
Let's see. Dream job or forever vacation?
Dream job.
Bulletproof coffee or green juice?
Bulletproof coffee.
Multi passionate or long term visionary?
Long term visionary.
Elon Musk or Warren Buffett?
I'll take Warren every single day.
And what does it mean to be brave?
I think being brave is realizing your self worth and realizing how awesome and unique you are, and not to hide that from the world, but to exploit it in making other people great as well.
And finally, one word that describes this season of life.
Intentional.
Oh, well, everyone, go follow John Miles, get his book Passion Struck, and thank you so much for tuning in, and thank you for your wisdom, John. Such a pleasure to hear your incredible life story and how you are fueling your mission and purpose and passion in the world.
Well,
Thanks for being with us.
Neetha, thank you so much for having me. It's such an honor to be on the show and to serve your amazing audience.
Until next time on the Brave Table. All right. I hope everybody is truly transformed by this episode. This is one that you are going to listen to over and over again. John just has so much wisdom. And honestly, he is such a breath of fresh air. I have interviewed over 230 guests. And honestly, he is one of the most kindest, gentlest humans. And I'm so grateful to call a mentor simply because he's been at it and he has lived a lot of life. And he is so generous and so kind. And these are some of the characteristics and qualities I wish I had in my mentors growing up. And he is just one of those souls that, and you can see it in his passion for entrepreneurship, his passion for young emerging minds and leaders. So I hope you take the time to get this book that will never leave your bedside. And the tips and tricks and tools are just so valuable for anybody. Even if you have kids that want to start something new, you can go ahead to and follow him at John_Miles. He's on Instagram. I will link him also in the show notes. But passionstruck.com. You can actually go to passionstruck.com/passionstruckbook. If you go to passionstruck.com, you'll also get access to his book. And I will also link 3 additional super juicy interviews all about living the life of your dreams and on purpose. So, with that being said, I'm so grateful that this month we are giving away a lot of things. All you have to do is follow us on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe, hit the follow button on Spotify and iTunes. And if you haven't already, we would love your 5-star review. Your show, this helps us grow the show more than you know, more than I can ever imagine. And my commitment to you is I will promise to deliver the most amazing content that will blow you away, take you on a beautiful journey into your most expansive, juiciest growth yet. So, do we have a deal? I'm so grateful that this month is my birthday month. So I'm giving away all fun things as long as you can send your screenshot of your 5-star review to support@globalgrit.co. That is support@globalgrit.co. I will see you all next time.